should be going live. It does appear like we are still possibly
Yeah.
frozen, but wait a second. Okay. I think maybe it's working. We'll see. Um, and if not, I apologize to those of you who are online just watching a frozen face. But we'll have our conversation and we can always post it later if Facebook does not want to work for us today. But
Mm.
I can't believe we're here. I can't believe we're here at our last week of this discussion group. This has been kind of almost a year's, I guess, an academic years long journey since September, working our way through Emanuel Swedenborg's work, New Jerusalem, a chapter at a time, and we have come to the end. So we'll discuss this final chapter together, and then I also happy to make space to talk about kind of the work as a whole, the journey as a whole. Because I have to admit, I don't know, it sort of ends with a bit of a thud. This last chapter is not the most engaging or exciting of all that we have explored, but perhaps we'll
Yeah.
mine some jewels. I'm joined today by Karen Conger out in California. Do you want to say hi, Karen?
Hey, nice to see you, I hope.
Yes, we hope.
Yeah.
And Dr. Rebecca Esterson from the Center for Swedenborgian Studies in Berkeley.
Hello, it's so wonderful to be here finally. I've been hoping to hop on earlier than this last day, but I'm glad to have made it in the end.
I'm glad you got in at the end. Yes, your coursework allowed you to be here today. Yeah, so our chapter this week, after all we have journeyed through, focuses on ecclesiastical and civil governance. This is one of those chapters I really wish Swedenborg could be here to talk to us about this. As I was reading this, I felt like, does he, was he writing this for someone? Was he writing this to protect himself? I don't know. But all of these dramatic, radical invitations that he's making about this new church. And then we get a pretty traditional, pretty 18th century model about what government is for. And he really names government in relationship to heavenly matters as the church, and then government related to earthly matters as kind of civil society. Um, as you can hear, I don't have a lot of excitement about this chapter. So I don't know. Where
I
would you
do.
like to start? Good. Please
Go,
enlighten me and
Rebecca.
inspire me, Rebecca. I would love to hear it.
There's definitely enough in here to chew on, I think. And I was remembering that George Dole, our beloved ancestor in our tradition, was talking about this chapter here. At the end of his life, he was putting forth a vision of what he called the newer new church. He published about this and he spoke about this, and he really was encouraging the Swedenborgian tradition to imagine a newer new church. And I remember him pointing to this chapter. On the one hand, to say, we're actually a tradition without a whole lot of concrete description about what a church should look like and how it should govern itself. It's actually a pretty minimal description when you look at this. So we're not going to be able to like flip open a book written by Swedenborg and know how to organize our churches. Like, what is the role of lay leaders? What is the role of the clergy? What is how is the governance structure supposed to operate? It's not in there. Um, what is in there is interesting. Yes, he's using the language of priesthood and monarch, which is language that we don't use in our tradition and in our country. It's actually language that we resist. But if you look at what these leaders and teachers are supposed to do and not supposed to do, it's interesting. To me, the most important idea in here and the most important teaching about how to be a church that we carry as Swedenborgians is that we are not to compel anyone in terms of what to believe. This is number 318. Priests are not to compel anyone because people cannot be compelled to believe anything that contradicts what they think in their hearts to be true. To be a part of a religious tradition that sees religious compulsion or the pushing of a certain belief system on another person as actually, I would use the word sinful, as extremely problematic and spiritually damaging activity, is really something. And I think that alone could shape a lot of how we organize ourselves and what we do with ourselves
Yeah.
as a church.
Mhm.
I'll just pause there, but that's one of the ideas in here that I think is really, really key.
Thank you for putting a spotlight on that, Rebecca. As long as I can remember, that has been one of the things that I have really liked about this church.
Mhm.
And it does fly in the face. I'm is this one of the things that got him set up on heresy charges? Who knows?
Mhm.
It's fairly radical, isn't it? For the time, and maybe now.
Our time too, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And perhaps is one of the elements of the new church that has kind of seeded itself in other places. 'Cause I can certainly think of other progressive Christian and non-Christian communities who would lift this up similarly, in terms of compelling.
Mhm.
But we sort of see that kind of radical, like right now, it's very extreme of those who would compel and those who would not, you know? Um, Oh, it does look like our stream is working, even though I can't see it. It seems like Ralph can see it, and he says, "Yes, our time also." Thank you, Ralph. I'm glad you're
Yay.
with us. Good. Yeah. Yeah, and I would agree. I think that is one as many different Swedenborgian churches as I've been involved in different communities. I can't say as there's any that would not that is always present. That
Yeah.
value.
And there have been moments in time, there have been figures in history that have taken a more evangelical approach, but they're really the exception to the rule when it comes to and it's one of the reasons. I don't think it explains it entirely, but it's one of the reasons we're such a small movement, is that there's not an urgency to convert folks for the sake of their heavenly hereafter, because heaven is religiously pluralistic. Heaven has many religions. There's not an urgency, it's not, oh, if I don't convert my grandmother, she's going to go to hell. There's none of that. But also that actually compelling someone else to believe what I believe is considered an act of harm. So again, I think that's one of the reasons that as a movement, we haven't ever really had a lot of growth.
We have a very
Johnny Appleseed. Johnny Appleseed just popped into my head
sure.
with his tin pan hat and the rest of it. I wonder how, in actuality, how if he was ever offensive. I hope not. Tearing out pages of heaven and hell and handing them out. There is a novel out there somewhere. I've never tried to find it, but my mother happened upon it a long time ago, that has Johnny Appleseed interacting with a family somewhere in the Midwest who have just suffered a loss through suicide. And their church is telling them that this person is damned. And Johnny Appleseed is delighted to find the place in heaven and hell that shows that that is not the case.
It's such an interesting. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
go. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say it's such an I always find that like a lot of things, there's sort of that line, that razor's edge between the good and the bad, and there's sort of a razor's edge between the way we see proselytizing as compelling and you must believe these things to be saved, versus this is what I believe, versus being very open about what we believe. And I always like to believe Johnny Appleseed was among those of, this is so exciting. I just got to tell everybody about it, and we certainly have a lot of beliefs. We have a lot of ideas about what heaven is, and we share that very openly and profusely. But yes, there's that razor's edge of, but this is information that is important to us, but unless you are going to accept it freely, it's, it's not for the purposes of compulsion. Yeah. It's a thin line between the two, perhaps.
It's a thin line. I think about this line a lot as a teacher.
Sure.
Uh,
Mm.
and here again, Swedenborg's talking a lot about the role of the priesthood is to teach, and teaching is a really important function of our clergy. And there is a thin line between teaching and compelling, but it's a really important line.
Mhm.
To me, it's the most important line for any teacher, is to understand the difference between teaching and compelling, because your primary function as a teacher is to protect the freedom of your students,
Mhm.
to
Mm.
protect their freedom and to encourage their own creativity and their thought and the exploration of their truth.
Mhm.
Uh, so I like that language of a thin line. I think it is a delicate thing and a
Mhm.
really important thing.
I also wonder in our churches where um, I think, I mean, many, not every society, but some societies, there's a lot of pluralism in terms of what people believe. And so there's a there's a teaching about what Swedenborg wrote about and what he told us. And then, you know, and I think one of the questions I hold is how to teach that, how to teach that from our own experience while making space for other beliefs. Because there's almost like we're talking about this thin line between compulsion and teaching, but then there's also that area of like learning from others, of like speaking our own truth and then making room for others to speak theirs. And I always wonder, and I'm curious if you want to say more about George's view of the new church, because where does that live in how, sometimes I think, yes, maybe the church is very small because we don't compel others to believe it. Sometimes I think we're a little small because we're like, this is we're really focused in on Swedenborg and his view. And there isn't always a ton of room for bringing in, we really honor people of other beliefs, but we're not always in kind of active conversation with them.
I
And I
agree.
wonder the effect of that. We have our own language, our own, so much understanding that maybe isn't actively exclusive of difference, but in practice, it may sometimes function that way.
Yes,
Because there's a lot to learn to kind of get into the conversation.
yes.
I suppose.
Yeah, I remember Anna Woofenden and others often talk about when you're kind of a family-sized church, you can adopt family dynamics,
Yeah.
and that
Mm.
can create a kind of exclusionary culture, even when the theology and the philosophy of the tradition is not exclusionary, but the culture can kind of become kind of inward looking, inward facing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this chapter in particular, in this question of like how to be the new church, kind of how to embrace the new church, which I'm so engaged with that question. It feels like as much as Swedenborg told us so much about it and really kind of lit this fire and offered this kind of, carried these visions forward of like John of Patmos and, created this opportunity for us to think about this new way of living and way of being in community and way of being church. He also was, very grounded in a particular time. And I feel that so deeply in this chapter. Like, and just especially the way he talks about priests is like, I mean, wasn't this post-Reformation? It feels like he's speaking about the priesthood, like it is this monolith and it's priests just do this thing. And I just really wonder. It's like he had the vision of the new church, but as you pointed out, he did not offer any practical statements about how that might come to be, which is not surprising. He wasn't a clergy person. He was, living a solitary life. Like he really had no idea about and all the changes that would happen in the world, to make this known. I mean, it's probably good he didn't try to guess what it would be like. That probably would have been even worse. Um, but yeah, I'm struck by that. Yeah. But you've lifted up a gem. Thank you, Rebecca. So this lack of compelling, are there other gems that we might want to lift up and dust off and say, yeah, that's something we really value?
I have other gems.
Great. Go for it.
Again, if we can translate this language of priests and monarch
Sure.
into language that makes sense in our context, presidents and governors and senators and clergy people and spiritual leaders, okay, our leadership, civil and spiritual.
Sure.
He's saying something interesting here in both cases of priesthood and monarchs. The honor that comes with this role does not belong to the person in the position. So the honor that comes along with priesthood does not belong to the priest. The honor that comes along with monarchy does not belong to the monarch. It is not theirs. They do not possess it. It's not something that they can be credited with.
Yeah.
It doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the office. It belongs to the function.
Yeah.
There's something interesting in that to me, because it in practice, it should encourage kind of egoless kind of leadership.
Yes. Yes. No, I was very moved by that as well. And I feel like I experience in that more and more, like all the labels we hold and the roles we inhabit is like, it's lovely. And they give us the ability to move in the world and to be effective in the world. But I don't often think that like my MDiv will go with me when I die, or like my, that these are spaces we inhabit while we're here so we can be of use. So God's love can be of use, but they're not mine. It's not, and I agree. I mean, I love the sort of Native American view of the leader steps up for a time and then they step down. They're doing it not for anything they're getting from it, but from what they can give. And it does feel like that's one of the places where power and authority are kind of most often misused, when that perspective is not held.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. It's a great ideal, but like, how do you hold anyone to it?
I like the model of stepping up and stepping down is
Mm.
as a kind of test case. Can I step away from this position
Mm-hmm.
and leave it to somebody else,
Right.
as a check-in with yourself about your own ego in the position?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was George Washington's choice to step down as president that really allowed us to be the United States of America. If had he made a different choice, we would be on a very different path. And it seems like that choice, it's showing up again with those who do not want to step down and see
Yes.
themselves in service to a set of ideals, a set of laws. And I do hear that in here a lot.
Yeah, especially when it is to the obvious benefit of the whole for you to step down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
How crazy though, or how strange, or how, I don't know, maybe not so strange that a certain portion of the human family right now doesn't see that, has come to be so disheartened by the systems or the set of laws or the structures of government that they believe that a strong man or a savior should be given all of that authority and power. I mean, to me, it sort of speaks to our inner battle between our ego and ourself, and that is like playing out on a grand stage, or has
yes.
been for a long time.
Sometime. One of the things that I remember about the last course I took with George, it was, I guess it was at the beginning of COVID, and it was the run up to the 2020 election.
Mhm.
And somewhere around here, I could tell you where to find this, but someplace Swedenborg says that the evil has to rise to the surface. This is a paraphrase. The evil has to rise to the surface where it can be seen before it can be fought.
Yeah.
And I remember him, he was so profound about the way he described the ways he thought that was happening.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That there was a lot of it around, and it was an opportunity,
Yeah.
and it was very real.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, and we continue. It's getting more real. It's getting more real and more ridiculous and more terrifying kind of every minute, it feels like.
I
Yeah.
remember that sentiment in 2020. of
Mhm.
feeling like, okay, at least everything's coming up to the surface. At least we're seeing and we're acknowledging, anti-racism, the kind of energy around that. At least we're seeing things in ways that we weren't necessarily as a culture seeing them before COVID. There were just a lot of things that felt like, and now here we are 4 years later, and did we do the work? Did we respond to that seeing of evil
Mhm.
and acknowledging of evil? Did we respond, or are we kind of sinking back into um, our crutches and our
Yeah.
uh,
It seems to me that it's sort of like yes, and like I just feel like so much of this is so deep. It wasn't like we could all see it and then go, oh, and now we know what to do. It's like I think in some ways we're all sort of traumatized by the seeing. We've seen it. And also now we're sort of, oh, we see it and people still are living this way. People are still believing these things and kind of doubling down on separation. Like it almost continues to kind of be even more disheartening to witness. I like to believe we're in a healing journey that is, just getting started, that is really that it's not that we saw and then we all retreated, but we saw and now we're all sort of, okay, what does this mean? What is this, what are the next steps? Because it's not over in the long run. Like I think it's maybe we all sort of discovered it. It's like, okay, this is a marathon, not a sprint. How are we gonna
Yeah.
keep at this and keep seeing clear more and more clearly?
I I'm more aware in the last few years of how to put this into words. I'm seeing more and hearing more about the necessity of doing good and truth, of putting our love into action
Mhm.
and not just believing it over here. Um, the Methodist Church is going through this schism,
yeah,
and the church Stan and I belong to here in Bishop is moving toward love. At least that's the way I'm seeing it,
Mhm.
right? And for the last couple of years, when the minister has gotten up to invite people to communion, they've been saying point blank, you do not have to be a Christian to come to the table.
Mhm.
It's about what's in your heart. And here's Karen falling on it out of the pew. Um, I- I'm hopeful, and I'm
Yeah,
yeah,
there's a battle going on the deep level, which I think is partly why I was disheartened by this chapter, is I feel like at the same time that he's told us, every church grows and dies and fastation is a part of life and we can't judge people by, then I just wish he'd added, I think he could have put in like 6 more paragraphs to just sort of talk about what happens when leaders are corrupt. What happens when the system of the church or of the government, I mean, monarchs have fallen, like we have different governments now, and again, we can think about these things. It's okay that Swedenborg doesn't write every one of them. And, I think we need to think about those things. What is it? And I'm wrestling with this, what happens when you have a church structure or a governmental structure that is not serving people, or that needs growth and needs change, or you have a priestly authority that needs to be challenged. And there is a part in here, I wondered, Rebecca or anyone, talks about how in I think 313, how officials need their own organizational structure to prevent any of them, or on some whim or out of ignorance, from allowing evils to occur. It felt like that paragraph was like really speaking to kind of like an episcopal structure where you have levels of authority kind of keeping each other in check. And as a congregational church, we don't really, I mean, we don't
You need
really have
people
that, you know.
you
We've
need
had
people
more
who
of
are
that in the
skilled in
past.
law. Yeah, I
Go
like
ahead.
this. You need people who are skilled in law. I like that. Organizations need the what do we call it in our tradition?
Parliamentarian.
Thank you. You need a parliamentarian. You need somebody who's just keeping an eye on, this is what we agreed to, and we're not
True.
quite keeping up to what we agreed to. You need people who think that way and who are interested in process and doing things according to the standards that we as a group have set for ourselves. And if we need new standards, then there's a process for that. I appreciate that in an organization. Um, yeah, he's not going to tell us how to do that here, but
Well, and I don't know how much that lives out. Maybe it does on the denominational, but it just feels like part of the reality of the church right now is there's a lot of autonomy between groups, and there isn't a lot of that playing out. There's no authority that could move a minister from one place to a next, or who could challenge a congregation that's, going in a different direction. There's a lot. It's
yes.
yeah, which it's not good or bad. It's just
We do in this denomination, we do have the Board of Mediation. And that is put into play when somebody from the ministry comes to the president. And it's happened a couple of times.
Sure.
So we do have a couple of checks and balances around.
Yeah.
The model of priesthood that he's putting forward here is the Good Shepherd, with a very pragmatic view of what a successful priesthood is. It's a priesthood that leads people to good lives, period.
Yeah.
If this is a ministry that's leading people to live good lives, success. Keep doing what you're doing. If this is a ministry that's not leading people to live good lives or better lives, something needs to change. That's the standard by which a ministry is judged. It's not what it's teaching, right? It's not the doctrines. It's not the bullet point list of truths. It's our people being led in a way that's beneficial to them and to their community.
Teaching people the way to heaven and leading them on the path. Yeah, and it names there's good shepherds and there's bad shepherds. And that's just the reality of it. And that priests must not claim to have power over people's souls. I like that. I did like that line, because in actuality, they do not know the state of people's inner selves. Which again, I think is part of the interesting thing of like, well, what does it mean to lead a good life, Rebecca? What does it mean to lead people towards heaven and towards a good life? I think that's another element I do hear a lot in Sweden. We don't know what's going on inside someone. We don't know what the intentions are behind the things they do, so there is, which I appreciate that. Like, I don't want anybody stepping up and saying, I know, who's good and who's bad, or I know who's on the, that's, I like that we don't do that. And collectively, sometimes it's difficult to think about, what does a good life look like? What does it mean to be being led to heaven? What does it mean to be, I personally have been starting to think a lot about how heaven is this place where everything we need is offered and everything we have to offer is needed. That like coming to heaven is about that flowing more freely, and that in a community that is happening, where our needs are being met and what we have to bring are being received, which is but maybe there are other definitions of the heavenly life.
That's as good a one as I've ever heard. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, because part of what I love about this tradition is we aren't saying the heavenly life means that it will look a certain way, which is one of the ways that church has kind of problematically played out. Everybody comes in their hats and their nice gloves, and we're all doing the right thing, or in Calvinism, if you're getting a lot of money, then you must be being really good, and God must really love you. And we're stepping back from any of that judgment, which I think is so vital. But but it makes it tricky sometimes to figure out how to teach people the way to heaven and lead them on the path, and maybe that's where each of us might go, our paths might be different, um, yeah.
Yeah, I remember listening to George and, trying to hear from him here at the end of his life, having thought about these things deeply. So what exactly do you suggest, George? Like, what's the formula here? What should we tweak? What should we change? What,
Mhm.
um, but it wasn't like that. It was a message of, it was really a message of let go of your idea of what church needs to be or what church should look like,
Mhm.
and focus on loving and understanding one another.
Sure.
And I remember him having this model of like a parent with a teenager. I've got two teenagers, so I can relate. As a church, if people leave, let them go. Let them go. Let
Mhm.
your teenagers go. If they come back, embrace them.
Yeah.
I remember him saying that. Let
Yeah.
people go, let them come back, love them on their journey.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's not going to solve all of our day-to-day problems about how to
Not
keep the
so
bill.
much.
But
How
that's
to,
okay. And maybe all those day-to-day problems aren't ours to solve. I think I think that's been the big aha for me is like it's easy to fall into thinking we need to build the church and we need to grow the things, we need to save all the buildings, or it's easy to get really embroiled in the external realities of the church. But I think it's I like that our church is is not founded on any particular external realities, that our church is founded on a deeper inner reality that will be with us when we depart these bodies. So, you know, yeah, we can have beautiful big church buildings and do great things, and that's lovely, but we could also do a lot of smaller, subtle things, and that also could be lovely. I feel like there's a real, you know, so if my job is to teach people the way to heaven, then I need to find that way, for myself. I need to find that way to heaven, and I need to learn to rest in it. My favorite George teaching was his last talk that he published before he died in the Messenger. And the theme of that talk was, in the holy city, everything is known. There's no hiding anymore. There's no subterfuge. And this real, he was really pondering, if people knew everything about me, they, my friends, my loved ones, they would still love me, that we actually love each other more sometimes when we know the fullness of who we all are and we know each other's foibles, but no one's trying to get perfect, and that love is offered us by God, and that we could start to love, we could offer that to one another. Um, so which I think comes back to what we have to offer is received and what we need is being given. Is the only way for that to happen is to be honest. The only way to get what we need is to name what we need. And the only way for what we have to offer to be received is to offer it and see if anybody wants it. So there's feels to me like a big part of the heart of the new church invitation is that transparency and that willingness to sort of show up fully, which in some ways is like living the heavenly life now, which is part of the invitation to taste heaven now, not just after we are gone. The trick about it when we do it here is it's not seamless. We offer things and people don't want it, or we ask
Yeah.
for things and we don't get it, but we're never going to get there if we don't start to take those risks. So
One of I guess we're talking a lot about George. How nice.
yeah, that's nice. It's nice.
One of the things that I remember,
Mhm.
um, he talked about the importance of listening
Yeah.
and following nudges. That's not the word he uses. Following through on the things that you receive,
Mhm.
if they seem to you to be heavenly, the importance of that. And that apparently for him, it had become fairly simple. He loved going to church and being around other souls and having opportunities to make some difference, and then going about his life conscious of the importance of all of that. He talked about the beauty of holiness and how important it was to have for him to have a beautiful place to worship.
I
Yeah.
love that.
I love that. And it's one of those, I get a little niggly about it because I think I feel like he wrote another talk where I read about, similar to your thing, Rebecca, about, if you need to go, go. He often would talk about like the church is always there. And there's something beautiful about the church always being there for you, whether you go or you come back. What is someone trying to keep a building going? It's hard
What
for the church to always be there, you know?
if it's
That's
not there?
Be there in some form,
that's
stage, and you're
tricky.
doing such a good job.
Well, but that's just it. Maybe, maybe we identify that church is always there by the beautiful building or the beautiful worship. But I do have to wonder if what the church actually is, if the reason it feels so good to be in that space is not because of the building, but it's the humans there. And it's his own soul that was able to find peace and
Absolutely.
wholeness
It's
in that
because
space.
he was
I'm
where
a
he
both and
was.
on this one. I'm a
Yeah.
both and on this one. I do think sacred spaces are, of all the things we should be preserving in our world, number one on the list. We should be preserving our sacred spaces. Here in Berkeley, there's long been a struggle to repatriate or rematriate is the word that the leaders here like to use, the Berkeley Shell Mound, or this ancient burial ground that belonged to
Oh.
the Native Americans here. And I think about our sacred spaces, and I think about these are not disposable. And so I'm a both and I know the reality of a small group of people being able to maintain a complicated piece of real estate in today's world is totally overwhelming, and can lead to burnout. And I know. So I'm a both and. I do love our beautiful sacred spaces, and
Yeah.
think that every effort to preserve them is an effort well spent.
Yeah.
And I know that we have to take care of ourselves and imagine church to be something that is a little bit more nomadic than a stone building.
Yeah. I'm a both end too. And I think they were built by humans, they were built with high aspirations and beautiful. So there's holiness in the building and crafting of these spaces. Um, it's just it just brings in more questions, I think, for us to hold about how we hold them. And especially if we're starting to have, I really, it doesn't really play out in this chapter, but I think in so many of the ways Swedenborg talks about the new church, it's like the new church is happening everywhere all the time between all the humans, all the people that are living good lives. Like it's this unnamed network that is like keeping the world going, like making things possible. And so knowing that, then like how do we serve that? How do we and I think our sacred spaces are one of the ways we can serve that. And I I am actively wondering, how to breathe life into those spaces, to make them spaces that are accessible to more humans, and that proclaim this bigger vision, because this is a new church, this is a bigger vision. This is something even that is different from the kind of other model of what church was, and that requires maybe new structures, new forms, new ways of organizing ourselves. The world does not look like he's outlined it here,
Right.
anymore, ever, most places, um, and one line I did want to bring in was 318, where he writes, people whose beliefs differ from those of the priest, but who do not cause disturbances, should be left in peace. But if they do cause disturbances, they should be removed from the church. I wondered if he was thinking of himself a little bit in that statement. This is part of the priesthood's responsibility to maintain order. I don't know. it just seems like he's not really addressing any of the changes that had already taken place in the life of the church and that he was proclaiming were to come in that statement. Like, how do we, I don't
You
know.
know, the Lutheran Church must have been very, very rigid. The Lutheran Church in his time must have been like the Catholic Church was too.
Although he was
Maybe,
in England, wasn't he, by the time he was writing this book, Rebecca? Do you know
I don't, was he?
the timing of it? I guess it was written
Yeah,
in.
he's still he's still speaking to, I think, the Swedish Lutheran Church in a lot of this. I
Yeah.
think he's always talking to his father to some degree, I think.
Ah, okay.
Uh,
Yeah,
mm,
he was a
mm.
Lutheran bishop.
I never thought of that.
Yeah.
Well, and as we've talked about, perhaps as much as we now today, knowing what's occurred and the state of the world as it is, I know for me, I see the new church as this radical invitation. But and for him, perhaps he saw the new church and what he was writing about as something that would become totally integrated into the
Apparently.
structures that existed at the time, possibly. We don't really know. Um,
I think the key thing to a Swedenborgian vision of the new church is freedom of thought.
yeah.
Um, that we shouldn't be afraid of each other's thoughts and ideas. We shouldn't be afraid of um, that allowing people freedom of thought is not a dangerous activity
Mhm.
in the church or elsewhere. That it's a necessary stage in the realizing of our potential, our spiritual potential.
Well, then why
Uh,
don't I bring in a good active question in relation to that? If that's central to who we are, what do you think the role of like a statement of faith is in that
mm, yes,
ideal?
yes, good question.
Yeah. And I think that's where I really wonder about
Mm.
new models because so many of our worship services are similar to other churches where you recite scripture and you have prayer and you recite a statement of faith and that's what brings you
Mm,
together. And there was a quote on the foundation shared just today or yesterday where Sweden talks about if we all were together in love, we wouldn't be concerned about theological differences. It wouldn't bother us. But because we are not, we have all of these sects.
mhm.
And I think that's one of my questions I'm holding is sort of how to, if a statement of faith is not going to be the thing if that's actually not maybe totally in line with this view of the new church where we should allow freedom of thought and freedom of expression.
Yeah, or allow or have more individualized statements of faith.
Mhm,
This is how I see it. Here are the truths here are the truths that are taught in this church that are most important in my life.
mhm.
I do think there's potentially a place for community coming together and saying, here's what we believe.
Together. Mhm,
But I would argue that that should be malleable. That should be able to be changed and
mhm.
by the members at any given time.
Yeah. And maybe in relation to what you were saying, Karen, maybe it's less about this is together what we believe, and maybe it's more about this is what we do. This is how we love in action. That these are and I think about that a lot, how, and I really feel like that's part of this moment is we know there's a lot of need in this moment. There's a lot of evil rearing its head. There's a lot of we're seeing more clearly kind of what's needed in the world. And I think of all of our religious brothers and sisters and spiritual brothers and sisters of different faiths and different traditions, all like trying to be in line with this God, trying to be loving, trying to, and yet doing it all in all our very different ways. And if there's not part of our work is not to find more ways to work together, to do the love stuff, to bring the change that our world so desperately needs. And I know it's happening and it's happening a lot of places. Um, but I wonder for our tradition in particular, if that's not perhaps one of our particular uses to talk to each other about all of this trying to follow God thing, you know, to be united in it with our different ways of ways of seeing it and understanding it.
I really love, Sage, your framing of heaven is where we get what we need and we are able to give what we have to. You said it. How did you say it?
That it's where what we need we receive, and what we have to offer is received.
Yeah,
There's different ways to say it, but yes.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
so
It's the second piece of that that's the most interesting to me, because and to raise up your vision of a Helen Keller Center for spiritual life, and her belief that we need to change society, not just to make society accessible to people with disabilities, but to make society a place where people with different abilities and disabilities can give what they have to give fully, can be full participants, right? So it's not just about making it easy for someone to get around, it's about making it easy for them to contribute in the workplace, in school. And I think a lot about our public schools and the way that disability, the needs of people with disabilities is being met imperfectly in our school systems. But what I see is an incredible growing of awareness of the way that different people learn differently. Different kids learn differently. This is so key. And I see it coming to awareness here in our Berkeley public school system, where we have full integration. So kids with all kinds of disabilities and abilities and whatnot are in the classroom together, and there's a lot of resources put into aids for children of different needs. And kids are in a classroom with all kinds of differences in the same room. And what it does to a community to accommodate for everybody's different needs so that everybody can contribute.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous. When it works, it's gorgeous. And if we can replicate that idea in kind of the developing of what used to be called special education, but if we can develop that into how can we reshape our communities so that people who struggle in different ways, in ways that are difficult maybe for them to integrate, are nevertheless provided a way in which they can contribute. They can contribute what they have to contribute. Yeah. That's a beautiful vision of heaven.
Yeah.
And a beautiful vision of church.
Totally. And one thing that I've become more aware of or wondered about is, for that to occur, one thing that will need to happen is that the kind of the able-bodied, kind of fully articulated vision of what a human is has to be brought down so that it's on the same plane with all of these other people. That right now, so far, we have kind of abled and then disabled. We still have this distinction. And I mean, I'm more and more thinking about, like, especially I think about people with autism who are not cued into social cues. And as I grow up, I'm like, our social cues are insane. It's insane that we have to pay attention to all of these things. And I spend so much of my energy worrying about how I'm going to look or what. Like, I'd rather have a special interest. That would be like a better use of my brain. Like, it just feels like there's so much we can learn, and there's just like, it's almost just showing us the tip of the iceberg of human potential, and that it's so diverse, and that right now we really are still in sort of the dismantling of white supremacy. Like, we have this model of like, well, this is what a healthy person looks like, and these are all the things they do. And we're kind of realizing that all the people who are actually trying to do those things are probably suffering from anxiety and depression, and are actually not totally like that totally autonomous human model is not even actually, is not the ideal that is going to build a sustainable world. That we really that a lot of the assumptions we've had need to be reconsidered. And a place to do that reconsidering is from that foundational idea that we are all embodiment of God. We all have something to bring. And the way this is going to work is if we all get to bring our thing, and we get our needs met. And it's going to require a lot of toppling because there are certainly a lot of people in the population who are getting their needs met very well in the system as it exists now.
Mhm.
So there has to be a relinquishing a bit of that safety, which I think is part of the tension that exists in the world right now, with those who are satisfied with the way things are and think we should just keep at it, and those who are seeing an entirely different world that's going to require some discomfort to get to.
There's so much, there's been so much change
Yes.
over the last, I don't know, pick a number of years.
Mhm.
It's been quite rapid,
Yes.
and I think it's scaring the daylights out of
Yeah.
a certain segment of the pop. Well, it's scaring me a little bit too,
Sure.
but I'm not. I hope I'm not therefore turning my back on
Mhm.
anything that I need to be paying attention to. So it's wild times. It's wild times.
I think you're right, Karen. And I think because of that, a lot of us are sort of like just are doing the pullback. This is too scary. But
Yeah.
like we really should kind of be a little scared. I was revisiting my talk from Freiburg last summer, and I was like, I mean, if you just stop for a second and think about just the history of evolution and the history of humanity and what has occurred over just the last 300 years, like it's bonkers. It's
Yeah.
totally bonkers that we're talking online right now and you're in California. Like everything is bonkers. And I think it's when we think that it's not bonkers and like, oh yes, this is just as it should. And I think like my grandparents probably, they had a like, oh yes, it's just as it should be. And it's going along nicely. Like that idea that we have a handle on any of this, I think is part of the problem. Like everything is going so fast, and it is terrifying. And that's partly why I think we need a new church. That's partly why we need to be so grounded in the eternal that doesn't change, in something that is steady and that binds us all together. We kind of need to hold tightly to one another, just to get our grounding and just to like be able to breathe. And that's why I do think sometimes this insanity is actually helping, ultimately, potentially helping us
I hope so.
see what's important in the midst of it. Because
I
if we
like
try to
that a
hold on to
lot.
this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I like that. No, excuse me. I like that thought a lot.
Yeah.
I hope you're right. I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel lucky to be midlife at this
Yeah.
moment
Yeah.
and to have children in my life and to have older people in my life. I think the intergenerational tie, so a lot of, we're talking about rapid change in our society, and a lot of times it's a generational, the tension is generational. But I think that's also the key to getting through it, is holding on to our little ones and holding on to our elders, and the wisdom that can come from both perspectives. My kids, oh my gosh, my kids blow me away with their ability to process the world that they're experiencing, which is insane.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing a study, or hearing a story once about an atheist church. So this group of atheists wanted to build a community with a kind of community cohesiveness and all of the benefits of having a church community, but for atheists.
Right.
And the one thing they couldn't quite replicate, and I'm sure there are groups who've managed to do it better, but this was early on in this movement, they couldn't replicate the intergenerational piece that folks get from church. It tended to be adults of a certain age span. And that's what they were missing. They didn't have the kids and the grandparents in the room together. And I think that's a really important piece of what a spiritual community can do, is it can bring these different generational voices into a room when the world is going crazy, to provide some stability.
Thank you, Rebecca. The Methodist church that Stan and I go to, at the onset of COVID, everybody disappeared, of course, except online, and we lost all the kids. They didn't come back.
Yeah.
And they have gone to the one or two very conservative Christian churches in the community. The kids that we had in 2019 are a lot older now. But I mean, these churches with the sort of theology of fear going are where the families are now.
Wow, that's interesting.
So, you're talking about, Rebecca, about this group that couldn't replicate that whole, we've lost that. Oh, and we're the church that has the soup kitchen and the shower ministry going on and is open to LGBTQ plus.
Mhm.
So there's that whole scary, this is too much change in too small amount of time thing dynamic again, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. We have more and more new people coming in, but they're all about my age.
Yeah.
Or we've got one new couple in there in around 50. Anyway,
Mhm.
just throwing that out there.
Well, no, I know, and that's the thing. I share your idea. I love intergenerational relationships. I think it's so vital. I think that's partly why our church camps are so precious, because
Oh yeah,
that
I think
happens
so
there.
too.
And in most of the churches I've served, that hasn't totally the church in Freiburg, it was like there was every age but mine. So there were elders and there were kids, but so it's hard, and I think that's partly why that's another piece of what I'm wanting to be in conversation about is like when the model of church that works for one generation doesn't work for the next, how do you
Mhm.
maintain those? How
Yeah.
do we stay in communication and conversation? Because I totally agree, Rebecca. I think that's why people keep going to Almont and to Freiburg. They want to sit with their elders. They want to hear from them.
Mm.
And they want to see the children, and I think that kind of relation, and it's less and less in our world. Schools are segregated by age, college, you're with we need more spaces like that. I completely agree. How to build them and make them and maintain them, I don't have that answer.
Yeah.
And that happens at our convention meetings too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons that we keep having them annually,
Yeah,
because we
probably.
get a chance
Right.
to see the kids and the youth and everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Honor all of the stages of life.
Yeah.
Can I just read one little George Dole bit to
Yes,
close?
please.
Oh, please.
Oh, I wrote this down somewhere because I was looking at he wrote a series of 6 articles on the Newer New Church when he was doing this work. And this one line stood out to me, and he's interpreting Arcana Celestia 3207, paragraph 5, for anybody who wants to look it up. For years, I assumed as a matter of course that, quote, what is true enables us to sense what is good because it teaches us, end quote. I was not aware that the passage goes on to say, quote, but this is an appearance. It is something good that is enabling what is true to perceive. You see, the good is the soul or the life of the true, end quote. We tend to think that if we just had the truth, if we could figure out the truth, that we would be able to teach it to everyone and everyone would live good lives. And it's actually the reverse, that it's the love, the compassion, the goodness that compels us to seek out the truth and to recognize it.
That was the other thing I remember him sharing at one of the last peer supervisions I was at with him, was he kind of made the point, like, anything wise I've ever said is because of some goodness in me. It was not because of my intellect, or my studious research. It was God's living through me. And he kind of was saying it sort of, I think he was sort of wondering, maybe I could have been a yo-yo player. I don't know, like his life could have gone differently. Like that it was, and not that he didn't love his life. I think he completely loved the things he did, but just that it really was about that goodness. And I think for George's sake and for all our sakes, I think we have to sit with that. As a tradition with so much to say about truth, we probably need to sit with that goodness and see where it leads us into the future. Well, this
Speaking of which,
has been
your
okay.
sweater message, Sage. I just love your sweater message. Love.
Yeah, there you go.
My uniform.
Perfect.
Yes, this is my clergy uniform at this point.
Nice.
Well, thank you all for joining us online. Looks like quite a few people found us.
Yay.
Thank you for everyone who's participated in this discussion group. I will share, I'm in the process of doing two things. I'm starting a podcast. I'm actually interviewing
Woohoo.
the Reverend Steve Pultz this afternoon, as my first guest, which I'm really excited about, as he was the minister who loved me into being as a teenager.
Wow.
So I'll be publishing that soon, and I'm also getting ready to publish a Substack called Worship is Life. So those are some things I'm working on. Prayers appreciated, lots of nerves and fears and anxiety roiling around. But this has been a really fun format, so I'm very open to doing another discussion group, perhaps in the fall. So reach out if there are books you'd like to read. And blessings to everyone on our work and efforts at being a new church, individually and together.
Thank you so
Rebecca.
much,
Thank you,
Sadie.
Karen.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I
Blessings.
appreciate all your involvement. I'm glad you could join us, Rebecca, for our last
Thank you.
act.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Bye,
Be
everybody.
well.
Bye, everybody.